Blood dripped from Zoe Robinson's clenched fist as camera flashes illuminated the boardroom. 20 executives watched in stunned silence. "Congratulations on your promotion," CEO Richard Evans announced, unaware the flight attendant who had humiliated her yesterday now stood frozen at the doorway. Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button if you've ever experienced or witnessed discrimination while traveling, and subscribe to follow Zoe's incredible journey of resilience against systemic racism in corporate America. Ready to discover how this powerful moment came to be? Zoe Robinson's alarm blared at 3:30 a.m., jolting her awake in her Brooklyn apartment. The 35-year-old marketing executive had precisely 2 hours and 30 minutes to prepare for the most important day of her 15-year career. The Chicago presentation wasn't just another pitch. It was her shot at the director of global marketing position she'd been working toward since graduating summa cum laude from Howard University. Sliding out of bed, careful not to wake her boyfriend Calvin, Zoe padded to the bathroom and stared at her reflection. Dark circles shadowed her eyes from the weeks of preparation. She'd stayed up until midnight finalizing slides, rehearsing responses to potential questions, and researching every board member who would be present. For a black woman in corporate America, being prepared wasn't enough. She needed to be flawless. "You ready for today?" Calvin mumbled from the doorway, his hair tousled from sleep. He wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "As ready as I'll ever be," Zoe replied, leaning into his embrace briefly before pulling away. "I need to get moving." Calvin sighed, watching as she began her meticulous morning routine. "You know, white executives don't stress like this before presentations." "That's because white executives don't have to prove they belong in the room every single time they walk in," Zoe responded, her voice tight. "We've had this conversation." This wasn't their first discussion about the different standards she faced. Calvin, a software engineer who worked remotely, couldn't fully grasp the constant pressure she navigated. In his world, results spoke for themselves. In hers, results were just the beginning. In the shower, Zoe's mind raced through her journey. The unpaid internship where she worked nights at a cafe to pay rent. The entry-level position where her ideas were stolen by her white manager. The junior executive role where clients asked to speak to someone in charge, despite her being the team leader. 15 years of microaggressions, underestimations, and having to be twice as good for half the recognition. After her shower, Zoe opened her closet and pulled out the Chanel suit she'd invested in 3 months ago. Navy blue, tailored perfectly to her athletic frame. The price tag had made her wince. But as her mentor Patricia Washington always said, in these boardrooms, they judge the package before they hear the contents. Patricia, the only other black woman executive at Pinnacle Industries, had taken Zoe under her wing 5 years ago. At 62, Patricia had broken barriers Zoe couldn't imagine, paving the way for younger black women like her. Their weekly coffee meetings had become Zoe's sanctuary, a space where she didn't have to explain or justify her experiences. As Zoe applied her makeup, professional, not too bold, her phone rang. Her mother's name flashed on the screen. "Mom, it's not even 5 a.m., Zoe answered, tucking the phone between her ear and shoulder as she applied mascara. "You think I could sleep knowing what today means?" Elaine Robinson's voice carried the slight lilt of her Jamaican heritage despite 40 years in the States. "Your father and I just wanted to call before you left." Zoe's throat tightened. Her parents had sacrificed everything for her education. Her father working double shifts as a hospital orderly, her mother cleaning houses while studying for her nursing degree. Their dream of seeing their daughter reach heights they couldn't had fueled Zoe through every setback. "I'm going to make you proud," she promised. "Child, we've been proud since the day you were born," her mother replied. "Just remember what your grandfather always said. Keep your head high and your standards higher," Zoe finished, the family mantra etched into her soul. After hanging up, Zoe carefully packed her presentation materials into her leather briefcase, another investment piece. Every detail mattered today. The flash drive with her presentation had 2 backups. Her portfolio contained printed copies in case of technical difficulties. Her tablet was fully charged with the presentation downloaded. Calvin appeared in the doorway with a travel mug of coffee. "You've got this, babe. They'd be idiots not to promote you." Zoe accepted the coffee with a grateful smile. Despite their differences in understanding, Calvin had always been her cheerleader. "I'll call you when I land." The Uber arrived at 5:15 a.m., right on schedule. As the car navigated the quiet streets toward LaGuardia Airport, Zoe mentally rehearsed her presentation one final time. The Pinnacle Industries account was worth $50 million annually, and her strategy had increased engagement by 38% in just 1 quarter. Numbers didn't lie, even when prejudice clouded judgment. By the time the car pulled up to the departure terminal, Zoe Robinson was no longer nervous. She was ready. What she wasn't prepared for was how drastically the next 24 hours would change not just her career, but her entire approach to navigating a world that wasn't designed for her success. LaGuardia's premium check-in area gleamed under soft lighting, a stark contrast to the main terminal's fluorescent glare. Zoe approached the first-class counter, rolling her carry-on behind her. The line was short, just 2 white businessmen ahead of her, both greeted with warm smiles from the attendant. When Zoe stepped forward, the attendant, Bradley, according to his name tag, glanced up with a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "Economy check-in is in the main terminal," he said, not even looking at the ticket Zoe had placed on the counter. "I'm aware," Zoe replied evenly, tapping her first-class ticket. "I'm checking in for the 6:45 to Chicago." Bradley's expression shifted to something Zoe recognized all too well, the subtle recalibration that happened when people's assumptions about her were challenged. He checked her in without further comment, but the warmth he'd shown the previous passengers had evaporated. This was nothing new. Zoe had developed a thick skin for these daily paper cuts of prejudice. Today, she couldn't afford to let them distract her. The security line moved efficiently, and Zoe placed her items in the gray bins: laptop, shoes, briefcase, jacket. As she walked through the scanner, it beeped. "Step aside, ma'am," a TSA agent directed, motioning to the screening area. Zoe complied, watching as several white passengers who had set off the same alarm were waved through with a wand check. The female agent who approached her snapped on blue gloves. "I'll need to check your hair," she stated flatly. "My hair?" Zoe questioned, aware of the passengers watching. "Security protocol." Zoe stood still as the agent's hands moved through her carefully styled hair, destroying the sleek bun she'd spent 20 minutes perfecting. She caught the eye of an older white woman watching, who quickly looked away, embarrassed to be caught staring. "What do they think she's hiding in there?" a male voice whispered loudly enough for Zoe to hear. "Entire beauty supply store probably cost more than my ticket." His companion snickered, making no attempt to lower his voice. "Probably got that first-class ticket through some diversity program. My company does it all the time. Gotta meet those quotas." Zoe's jaw tightened, but she remained silent. The presentation. Focus on the presentation. After being cleared, Zoe gathered her belongings and headed toward the first-class lounge. As she reorganized her hair in the bathroom mirror, the door opened and a black security guard entered. His name tag read Raymond. "Sorry about that back there," he said quietly, checking to ensure they were alone. "Happens to my wife every time she flies. It's not right." Zoe met his eyes in the mirror. No explanation needed. No justification of her feelings required. Just that look of shared understanding that passed between black people navigating predominantly white spaces. "Thank you," she said simply. "Good luck out there," Raymond replied before leaving. In the first-class lounge, Zoe noticed a blonde flight attendant watching her with unusual intensity. Heather Winters, as her name tag would later reveal, stood at the refreshment counter, her eyes following Zoe as she found a seat and opened her laptop for a final review of her presentation. Every few minutes, Zoe would look up to find Heather's gaze still on her, whispering to another crew member while glancing in her direction. The familiar internal debate began in Zoe's mind. Say something and risk being labeled difficult or aggressive, or ignore it and preserve her energy for what mattered today. She chose the latter, channeling her focus into her presentation until the boarding announcement came over the speaker. At the gate, Heather checked boarding passes, offering warm greetings to each first-class passenger ahead of Zoe. "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Peterson. Wonderful to see you again, Mrs. Goldstein. Safe travels, Dr. Hansen." When Zoe stepped forward, Heather's smile dimmed as she examined Zoe's boarding pass with unusual scrutiny. "First time in first class?" she asked, the question loaded with implication. "No," Zoe replied simply, extending her hand for her boarding pass. Heather reluctantly returned it, not offering the warm wishes she'd given every other passenger. As Zoe walked down the jetway, she took a deep breath. Just a few more hours until Chicago, until the presentation that could change everything. She couldn't let these distractions derail what she'd worked 15 years to achieve. Little did she know, the airport encounters were merely the opening act for what awaited her on board. Zoe settled into seat 3A, stowing her briefcase beneath the seat in front of her. The first-class cabin buzzed with pre-flight activity, flight attendants offering champagne, passengers arranging their belongings, the gentle hum of privileged travel rituals. Through it all, Heather Winters moved with practiced efficiency, her smile radiant as she attended to the predominantly white passengers. "Champagne?" Heather asked the silver-haired man in 3B, deliberately avoiding eye contact with Zoe. "Yes, thank you," the man replied, then nodded toward Zoe. "And one for my roommate as well, I presume?" Heather's smile tightened. "Of course," she said, pouring a second glass and placing it on Zoe's tray table without a word. "William Grant," the man introduced himself to Zoe, extending his hand. "Heading to Chicago for business or pleasure?" "Business," Zoe replied, accepting his handshake. "Zoe Robinson." "Same here. Board meeting at Pinnacle Industries, quarterly reviews, strategic planning, the usual corporate circus." Zoe nearly choked on her champagne. William Grant, one of the board members who would be evaluating her presentation in just a few hours. She hadn't recognized him from his company headshot, which must have been at least a decade old. "Are you all right?" William asked, noticing her reaction. Before Zoe could respond, Heather appeared beside their row again. "Excuse me, ma'am, but are you certain you're in the correct seat? This is first class." The question hung in the air, loaded with implication. Several nearby passengers turned to watch the interaction. "I'm quite certain," Zoe replied evenly, retrieving her boarding pass. "Seat 3A, as assigned." William's eyebrows rose. "Is there some problem, flight attendant? Ms. Robinson and I were having a conversation." Heather's eyes darted between them, clearly reassessing the situation now that William had aligned himself with Zoe. "No problem at all. Just ensuring everyone's comfortable." "I'd be more comfortable without the implication that I don't belong here," Zoe stated quietly, maintaining her composure despite the heat rising in her cheeks. Heather's face flushed. "I didn't mean to imply anything, simply doing my job." As Heather retreated, William turned to Zoe with an apologetic expression. "That was completely inappropriate. Has that happened to you before? What would you do if you were in Zoe's situation? Would you speak up directly to Heather, report her to the airline, or try to stay calm for your important meeting? Comment number 1 if you think Zoe should confront this discrimination head-on, or number 2 if you believe she should focus on her presentation. Like this video if you've ever witnessed similar treatment in supposedly premium spaces, and subscribe to see how Zoe handles this impossible situation. How far would Heather go with her suspicious treatment? "More times than I care to count," Zoe admitted. "But today, I can't afford the distraction. I have an important presentation in a few hours." William seemed about to ask more, but the flight attendants began their safety demonstration, temporarily pausing their conversation. As the plane taxied and eventually took off, Zoe tried to refocus on her upcoming presentation, reviewing key points in her mind. An hour into the flight, Zoe excused herself to use the restroom. When she returned 3 minutes later, she found Heather rifling through her briefcase, her laptop exposed. "What are you doing?" Zoe demanded, loud enough that nearby passengers turned to observe. Heather straightened, her face a mask of professional concern. "Security protocol, ma'am. We received information about a suspicious passenger matching your description." "What information? From whom?" Zoe challenged, her heart pounding. "I'm not at liberty to discuss security matters," Heather replied. "But items have gone missing from the first-class cabin on recent flights." The implication was clear as glass. Zoe felt 20 pairs of eyes on her, judging, assuming. William Grant had lowered his newspaper, watching the scene unfold with evident concern. "You had no right to touch my personal belongings," Zoe stated, her voice trembling not with fear, but with controlled rage. "Especially not my work materials before a critical presentation." Several passengers had begun recording with their phones. One woman whispered to her companion, "See? I told you she didn't seem like she belonged here." The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "This is Captain Keith Stevens. Is there a situation in first class that requires my attention?" Heather grabbed the cabin phone. "Everything's under control, Captain. Just a routine security check." Moments later, the cockpit door opened and Captain Stevens emerged. Tall, authoritative, white. He surveyed the scene, eyes landing on Zoe standing in the aisle. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked, directing the question not to Zoe, but to Heather. "Passenger became confrontational during a security check," Heather reported. "We had information about a suspicious individual. I was not suspicious until your flight attendant made me so by racially profiling me," Zoe countered, fighting to maintain her professional demeanor. "She went through my briefcase without permission while I was in the restroom." Captain Stevens's expression remained impassive. "Ma'am, our crew has authority to conduct security checks when necessary. I'm going to have to ask you to cooperate and keep your voice down." "She's telling the truth," William interjected. "I watched the whole thing. Your flight attendant targeted this woman without cause." The captain's eyes narrowed at William's intervention. "Sir, please stay out of airline security matters. I'm on the board of directors at Pinnacle Industries," William replied coolly. "And I know inappropriate conduct when I see it." The standoff continued for several excruciating minutes, with Heather insisting she was following protocol and Zoe defending her dignity. Eventually, Captain Stevens made his ruling. "Ms. Robinson, please return to your seat. Ms. Winters, no further searches will be necessary." To the rest of the cabin, he announced, "Everything's fine, folks. We'll be landing in Chicago on schedule." As the captain returned to the cockpit, the damage was done. For the remainder of the flight, Zoe endured curious glances and whispered conversations, the humiliation burning in her chest as she tried desperately to refocus on her presentation. William leaned over as the plane began its descent. "What they did was wrong," he said quietly, slipping a business card into her hand. "I recorded part of it. If you need a witness, call me." Zoe nodded gratefully, but inside, she wondered if this incident had already derailed the opportunity she'd worked 15 years to create. What she didn't know was that landing in Chicago would only be the beginning of her ordeal. The plane touched down at O'Hare International Airport with a jolt that matched the unsteady beating of Zoe's heart. As passengers began collecting their belongings, Captain Stevens's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've arrived in Chicago. Local time is 8:42 a.m. with clear skies and a temperature of 74 degrees. We ask that you remain seated until we've reached the gate. Also, passenger Zoe Robinson in 3A, please remain on board after deplaning. Airport security would like a word." The announcement sent a ripple of whispers through the cabin. Zoe felt her stomach drop as dozens of eyes turned toward her with renewed suspicion. William Grant frowned beside her. "This is absurd," he muttered. When the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers began filing out. Some avoided looking at Zoe altogether, while others stared openly. Heather stood by the exit, her expression smug as she bid farewell to departing passengers. Two uniformed security officers waited in the jetway. Zoe could see them through the windows, a man and a woman, both white, speaking with Heather, who gestured animatedly toward the plane. "I'm staying," William announced, remaining seated as the last passengers exited. "You don't have to do that," Zoe said quietly. I'm a witness to what happened. I'm not leaving you to deal with this alone." When security boarded, William attempted to explain the situation, but was quickly dismissed. "Sir, this doesn't concern you," the male officer stated firmly. "Actually, it does," William insisted, presenting his business card. "I'm William Grant, board member at Pinnacle Industries, and Ms. Robinson is scheduled to present to our executive team in less than 2 hours. This delay is unwarranted and potentially discriminatory." The female officer, whose name tag read Pearson, stepped forward. "We understand your concern, sir, but we have protocols to follow. Ms. Robinson, please come with us." "May I bring my belongings?" Zoe asked, maintaining her composure despite the panic rising within her. "They'll need to be searched thoroughly," Officer Pearson replied. William stood. "This is outrageous. I'll be contacting the airport authority and the airline's legal department immediately." His protest fell on deaf ears as Zoe was escorted off the plane. In the terminal, curious onlookers watched as she was led to a small security office, her professional dignity stripped away with each step. The questioning lasted 2 hours. 2 hours of explaining her career, her purpose in Chicago, her right to fly first class. 2 hours of having her belongings examined, her identity verified multiple times, her character questioned. 2 hours of the most important day of her career slipping away. Officer Pearson seemed to soften halfway through, perhaps recognizing the situation for what it was, but her partner remained suspicious, asking the same questions repeatedly as if hoping Zoe would contradict herself. "So, you just happened to be seated next to a board member of the company you're presenting to?" he asked for the 3rd time. "As I've explained, seat assignments are random. I had no idea Mr. Grant would be on my flight," Zoe replied, fighting to keep her voice level. By the time they finally released her, Zoe had exactly 43 minutes to reach Pinnacle Industries' downtown headquarters for her presentation. No time to freshen up, fix her hair, or compose herself. She rushed into the first taxi she saw. "Pinnacle Tower on Michigan Avenue," she instructed the driver. "And I'll pay double if you can get me there in 30 minutes. In the back seat, Zoe attempted to repair the damage. Her carefully styled hair had been completely disheveled during the security search. Her makeup needed touching up. Worst of all, her confidence had been shaken to its core. Zoe closed her eyes, hearing her father's voice from childhood. "When they try to break you down, that's when you stand tallest." After her parents had moved the family from their predominantly black neighborhood in South Side Chicago to the mainly white suburbs for better schools, 10-year-old Zoe had come home crying after being told by classmates that she didn't belong. Her father had dried her tears and taught her about dignity under fire, a lesson she'd carried into adulthood. She reapplied her lipstick, smoothed her hair as best she could, and straightened her suit jacket. By the time the taxi pulled up to Pinnacle Tower, Zoe Robinson had buried the morning's humiliation beneath layers of hard-earned professionalism. The receptionist directed her to the executive conference room on the 30th floor. As the elevator ascended, Zoe took deep breaths, centering herself. The doors opened, and she stepped out with her briefcase clutched tightly. Patricia Washington waited in the hallway, concern etched on her face. At 62, Patricia carried herself with the dignified bearing of someone who had broken barriers long before the term diversity became corporate vocabulary. "You're cutting it close," she whispered, her eyes taking in Zoe's slightly disheveled appearance. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Zoe replied automatically. "Just some travel delays." Patricia's expression said she didn't believe it for a second, but there was no time to explain. "They're waiting. Richard seems impressed with your preliminary numbers. Just be your brilliant self." Zoe nodded gratefully and entered the conference room where 12 executives, 10 men, 2 women, all white except for Patricia, sat around a polished table. Richard Evans, CEO of Pinnacle Industries, rose to greet her. "Ms. Robinson, we've heard excellent things about your strategy. The floor is yours." For the next 45 minutes, Zoe performed the high-wire act she'd perfected over 15 years, being exceptional while making it look effortless. She presented data, outlined strategies, answered questions with confidence and insight. Not a single tremor in her voice betrayed the morning's events. When she finished, Richard nodded appreciatively. "Impressive work, Ms. Robinson. Truly impressive. We'll be making some announcements tomorrow about the future of our marketing department. I hope you'll join us for dinner tonight, 7 o'clock at the Capitol Grill." Murmurs of approval filled the room as executives gathered their materials. Zoe accepted congratulations with a professional smile, but inside, she felt hollow. Even this triumph was tainted by the day's earlier humiliation. William Grant entered as others were leaving, catching Zoe's eye with a subtle nod. He'd clearly come straight from the airport to support her case, but had missed the presentation. Once alone in the hallway, Patricia squeezed Zoe's arm. "You nailed it. Whatever happened this morning didn't show for a second." "Thank you," Zoe replied, the composure she'd maintained finally beginning to crack. "Get some rest before dinner," Patricia advised. "Tomorrow's going to be a big day." In her hotel room, Zoe finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of the morning's events. She kicked off her heels, sat on the edge of the bed, and let the tears come. Tears of rage, humiliation, and exhaustion. Through blurred vision, she noticed her phone blinking with notifications. Opening her email, she found a message from the airline with the subject line, "Regarding your experience today." A form letter apology, clearly sent to appease a potentially problematic passenger. No acknowledgement of racial profiling, no admission of wrongdoing, just corporate speak designed to placate without accepting responsibility. For 15 years, Zoe had played by the rules. Keep your head down, work twice as hard, don't make waves, accept the microaggressions and macroaggressions alike as the cost of success. As she stared at the meaningless apology on her screen, something shifted inside her. The presentation had gone brilliantly. The promotion was likely hers, but at what continuing cost to her humanity? For the first time, Zoe wondered if there might be another way forward, one that didn't require swallowing her dignity daily, one that might actually change things for the next generation of Black professionals. Little did she know, events were already in motion that would force her to make that choice much sooner than she expected. Zoe's alarm jolted her awake at 6:30 a.m. After the celebratory dinner with Pinnacle executives, where Richard had all but confirmed her promotion with knowing smiles and future-oriented questions, she'd fallen into an exhausted sleep. The trauma of the flight incident had temporarily receded beneath the anticipation of her career advancement. That changed the moment she checked her phone. 57 missed calls, hundreds of text messages, thousands of social media notifications, and one video shared millions of times overnight with the caption, "Black executive racially profiled on flight to Chicago, flying while black." Zoe's hands trembled as she played the video. Someone in the first-class cabin had captured the entire confrontation with Heather and Captain Stevens in high definition. Every dismissive look, every coded accusation, every moment of humiliation preserved for the world to see. Worse still, the passenger had included Zoe's full name in the description, making her instantly identifiable. As she scrolled through comments, Zoe saw her experience reflected in thousands of similar stories. Black passengers sharing their own tales of flying while black. Professionals detailing the indignities they'd endured in spaces where they were presumed not to belong. The hashtag #HatFlying. While black had exploded overnight, triggering a national conversation about racial profiling in commercial aviation. Her phone rang. Patricia Washington calling. "Have you seen it?" Patricia asked without preamble. "I just woke up to it," Zoe replied, still processing. "I don't know what to do. The company PR team is already in damage control mode. They want you in Richard's office at 8. "Damage control? I didn't do anything wrong." "I know that," Patricia said firmly. "But Pinnacle has a major contract with that airline, $5 million annually for corporate travel." The implications hit Zoe like a physical blow. Her promotion, so close she could taste it, might now be in jeopardy because she'd been the victim of racial profiling by a company client. "What would you do?" Zoe asked, trusting Patricia's decades of experience navigating corporate racism. There was a long pause. "In my day, I would have stayed quiet to protect my position. But times are different now, Zoe. You have options I never had. After hanging up, Zoe turned on the television to find herself the subject of national news coverage. The airline had issued a statement that appeared on the screen. Atlantic Airways takes allegations of discrimination very seriously. We are investigating the incident and have placed the involved crew members on administrative leave, pending a full review. We strive to create an inclusive environment for all passengers and do not condone any form of discrimination. Standard corporate language that admitted nothing. Meanwhile, a morning show had somehow secured an interview with Heather Winters, who sat teary-eyed in the studio. "I was just doing my job," Heather insisted, dabbing at her eyes. "We had received information about suspicious activity, and I followed protocol. This has nothing to do with race. I'm being canceled for doing my job." The host failed to ask what information had prompted the search, or why only the black passenger had been deemed suspicious. Zoe's phone buzzed with a text from William Grant. "Just saw the news. Don't let them silence you. Call me before you meet with Richard." More calls came flooding in. Journalists requesting interviews. Old colleagues offering support. Even her college roommate, who now worked as a civil rights attorney. By the time Zoe arrived at Pinnacle headquarters, a small crowd of reporters had gathered outside. She slipped in through a side entrance, escorted by security to Richard's office, where the company's legal counsel and PR director already waited. "Zoe," Richard began, his normally friendly demeanor replaced by corporate caution. "This is an unfortunate situation." "Unfortunate doesn't begin to cover it," Zoe replied. The PR director, Vanessa Chen, stepped forward with a document. "We've prepared a joint statement with the airline. They're offering a significant settlement with a non-disclosure agreement. You wouldn't be able to discuss the incident publicly, but they're admitting fault in private and implementing new training." Zoe scanned the document, her marketing expertise catching the careful wording that protected the airline's image while appearing to address the issue. "And if I don't sign?" The lawyer, Jonathan Brooks, cleared his throat. "That would be your right, of course. But Pinnacle has significant business interests with Atlantic Airways. Going public against them could create complications." The unspoken threat hung in the air. Sign or risk losing the promotion. 15 years of work versus the opportunity to speak truth to power. "I need time to consider this," Zoe said finally. "The airline needs an answer by close of business today," Jonathan replied. Back in her hotel room, Zoe paced while her phone continued to explode with notifications. The airline's settlement offer was substantial, 6 figures, enough to put a down payment on a house or fund her younger sister Keisha's medical school tuition. Speaking of Keisha, her sister's FaceTime call came through at that moment. "Tell me you're not considering taking their hush money," Keisha said immediately, her face serious on the screen. "It's complicated, Keish. My whole career is on the line." "Your career? What about the next black woman they profile? Or the one after that? Nothing changes if they can just pay for their racism." Zoe sighed, thinking of all the times she'd stayed silent before. The white colleague who touched her hair without permission. The client who'd mistaken her for the administrative assistant despite her executive title. The countless times she'd been asked to tone down her communication style when assertive white colleagues were praised for the same approach. Each time, she'd swallowed the indignity for the sake of her career. Each time, she'd told herself it was temporary, just until she reached a position of power where she could make real change. "I don't know if one person can change an entire system," Zoe admitted. "You already are," Keisha countered, holding up her phone to show social media feeds filled with #FlyingWhileBlack stories. "People are speaking up because you didn't back down on that plane." After hanging up, Zoe began researching Atlantic Airways' history. What she found disturbed her deeply. Multiple incidents of racial profiling had been reported over the years, all handled with the same pattern. Private settlements, public denials, promises of training, and no substantial change. Heather Winters, it turned out, had 3 previous passenger complaints for discriminatory treatment, yet had been promoted to first-class service where passenger satisfaction ratings determined substantial bonuses. A text arrived from William Grant. "Dinner tonight? Important information to share. 6 p.m. at the Peninsula. At the upscale hotel restaurant, William was already waiting when Zoe arrived. He rose to greet her, his expression grave. "Thank you for meeting me," he said as they sat. "I've been making some inquiries about your flight attendant, Ms. Winters." "I've been doing my own research," Zoe replied. 3 previous complaints. 4 now, William corrected. "And something else you should know. Heather Winters is the niece of Brandon Pierce, Atlantic Airways Vice President of Operations." Zoe's eyes widened. That explains why she's still employed despite multiple complaints. "There's more," William continued, lowering his voice. "Pierce is golfing buddies with 2 Pinnacle board members. They've already been discussing how to handle this situation before tomorrow's board meeting." "The promotion announcement," Zoe realized. "They're going to delay it." William nodded grimly. "At minimum. Some are suggesting it would be inappropriate to elevate someone currently engaged in a controversial public dispute with a major client." The realization settled like a stone in Zoe's stomach. Even with a stellar presentation, impeccable qualifications, and 15 years of exemplary service, she could lose everything because she'd been victimized and refused to be silent about it. "What would you do?" she asked William. He considered the question carefully. "Professionally speaking, taking the settlement would be easiest. But speaking as someone who's watched his own daughter face discrimination in corporate America," he paused, meeting her eyes directly. "Some fights are worth having, even when they're costly." As Zoe left the restaurant, her phone rang with an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Ms. Robinson, this is Aisha Johnson from National Public Media. We're covering the #flying while black movement your experience has sparked. Would you consider sharing your story directly? Millions of people want to hear from you." The moment of decision had arrived. By midnight, Zoe would need to either sign the NDA or take a stand that might cost her the career she'd spent 15 years building. As she walked back to her hotel through the Chicago evening, the weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders, not just for her own dignity, but for every black professional who would come after her. The choice she made would change everything. Morning light filtered through the hotel curtains as Zoe sat cross-legged on the bed, legal documents spread before her. The airline's non-disclosure agreement and settlement offer on one side, her presentation notes and career portfolio on the other, the physical manifestation of her dilemma. Her phone displayed the time, 7:15 a.m. In less than 3 hours, she would meet with Richard Evans and the legal team for her decision. By afternoon, the board would announce the new director of global marketing. The timing wasn't coincidental. They wanted this situation resolved before making any public announcements. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Peering through the peephole, she was surprised to see Patricia Washington standing in the hallway, 2 coffee cups in hand. "Thought you could use this," Patricia said when Zoe opened the door. "And maybe some perspective from someone who's been where you are." They sat by the window, overlooking Chicago's skyline, steam rising from their cups. Patricia gestured to the legal documents. "I see they've given you the standard make it go away package." Zoe nodded. 6 figures and a private apology in exchange for my silence. "Generous," Patricia noted. "They must be terrified of what happens if you speak publicly." "It would pay for Keisha's medical school," Zoe said softly, "and the down payment on a house." Patricia was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant with memory. "When I was coming up in the 80s, I had an incident with a client. Not unlike yours, though there were no smartphones to record it then. The company offered me a promotion to keep quiet." "Did you take it?" "I did," Patricia admitted. "It seemed like the smart choice at the time. Keep my head down, build my career, make change from within." She paused, turning to look directly at Zoe. "But 40 years later, I'm still waiting for that change. Still watching brilliant young black women like you navigate the same humiliations I did." The weight of Patricia's words hung between them. Zoe thought of all the times she'd rationalized staying silent, telling herself that when she had power, she would use it differently. "What happens if I don't sign?" Zoe asked. "Realistically, best case, They make you the director anyway because you're undeniably the most qualified candidate, and they implement some diversity training to save face. Worst case, they pass you over, claiming it has nothing to do with this incident, and you become known as someone who's difficult. Zoe winced at the coded language often used to discredit black women who spoke up. But, Patricia continued, you'd also become someone who stood for something. Someone who refused to let money buy your dignity. That matters too. After Patricia left, Zoe received a text from Keisha. Whatever you decide, I've got your back. But for what it's worth, watching you succeed by any means necessary isn't what inspired me to go to med school. It was watching you stand up for yourself and others, even when it was hard. Do you think Zoe should sign the NDA and secure her promotion, or speak out against discrimination despite the professional risks? Comment number 1 if you believe career advancement should come first, or number 2 if standing up against injustice is worth any cost. Like this video if you've ever had to make a difficult ethical choice in your professional life, and subscribe to see what decisions Zoe makes. What would you sacrifice for your principles? At 9:45 a.m., Zoe entered the Pinnacle Industries conference room where Richard Evans, Jonathan Brooks, and Vanessa Chen waited. The settlement papers sat in the center of the table, pen placed strategically beside them. Have you reached a decision? Richard asked, his tone carefully neutral. Zoe set down her portfolio. Before I answer, I'd like to share something with you. She opened the leather binder, retrieving several printed emails. These are complaints filed against Heather Winters over the past 3 years. All from black passengers, all claiming racial profiling, all buried by Atlantic Airways. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably. Ms. Robinson, these documents aren't relevant to our discussion. They're entirely relevant, Zoe countered, because they establish a pattern that goes beyond one isolated incident. A pattern that Atlantic Airways is aware of and has chosen to ignore. That's a serious allegation, Richard said. It's a documented fact, Zoe replied, sliding the papers across the table. Heather Winters is the niece of Brandon Pierce, VP of Operations at Atlantic. He's protected her despite multiple complaints. Richard's expression changed subtly. This was new information to him. Furthermore, Zoe continued, I've learned that Pierce has personal connections to 2 Pinnacle board members who are currently advocating against my promotion specifically because of this incident. The room fell silent. Vanessa and Jonathan exchanged uncomfortable glances. Where did you get this information? Richard finally asked. That's not important, Zoe replied. What matters is whether Pinnacle Industries stands by its stated values of integrity and equal opportunity, or whether those values take a back seat to business relationships and personal connections. Richard leaned back, studying Zoe with new eyes. What exactly are you proposing? I'm declining the settlement and NDA, Zoe stated firmly. I've agreed to an interview with National Public Media this afternoon to discuss what happened. Not to damage Atlantic Airways, but to spark a necessary conversation about racial profiling in commercial aviation. Jonathan immediately began listing potential legal implications, while Vanessa outlined PR concerns. Richard silenced them both with a raised hand. And the director position? He asked Zoe directly. I still want it, she replied honestly. I'm still the most qualified candidate, with a proven track record of success. My ability to do the job hasn't changed. The only question is whether Pinnacle is willing to stand behind qualified employees when they're treated unjustly. Richard was silent for a long moment. The board meets at 2 o'clock to finalize the decision. I'll present your position. He stood, indicating the meeting was over. That's all for now. As Zoe left the conference room, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. Aisha Johnson confirming their interview. The decision was made. There was no turning back now. In her hotel room, Zoe prepared for the interview, selecting a professional outfit and rehearsing key points. She wouldn't vilify Atlantic Airways or position herself as a victim. Instead, she would focus on the systemic issues that allowed such incidents to occur repeatedly without consequence. A text arrived from William Grant. Board meeting has been moved up to noon. Pierce is attending as a client representative. This just got complicated. Zoe's stomach tightened. Brandon Pierce's presence at the board meeting was a clear attempt to influence the director decision. The powerful closing ranks to protect their own. Her phone rang again, her mother calling. "I saw the news," Elaine said without preamble. "Your father and I are worried." "About the job?" Zoe asked. "About you, child. We know how hard you've worked for this opportunity." Zoe sank onto the edge of the bed. "I keep thinking about what Dad always taught us, that our dignity isn't for sale." "He'll be proud to hear you say that," her mother replied, voice thick with emotion. "Whatever happens with this job, you've already succeeded where it matters most." After hanging up, Zoe stared at her reflection in the hotel mirror. The woman looking back at her wasn't just a marketing executive or a potential director. She was the daughter of Elaine and Robert Robinson, who had taught her that excellence wasn't just about achievement, but about character. She was the older sister of Keisha, who was watching to see if principles mattered more than promotions. She was part of a lineage of black professionals who had endured far worse than she had, creating opportunities through their sacrifices. The magnitude of the moment wasn't lost on her. By declining the settlement and speaking publicly, she was potentially sacrificing her own advancement for a greater cause. But for the first time since the incident, Zoe felt completely at peace with her decision. At 2:30 p.m., seated across from Aisha Johnson in the NPM studio, Zoe shared her experience calmly and factually. She didn't rage or accuse. Instead, she outlined the pattern of behavior, the structural issues that enabled it, and the changes needed to prevent similar incidents. "This isn't about one flight attendant or one airline," she concluded. "It's about acknowledging that racial bias exists in these spaces and taking concrete steps to address it. No one should have to prove they belong in a seat they've paid for." As the interview concluded, Zoe checked her phone to find a message from Richard Evans. "Board meeting running long, decision delayed. Will call when concluded." Hours passed with no word. Evening fell over Chicago as Zoe's interview aired nationally, sparking immediate reaction across social media. The hashtag #StandWithZoe joined #FlyingWhileBlack as thousands shared the interview. At 7:42 p.m., Zoe's phone finally rang with Richard's number. "The board is divided," he said without preamble. "Pierce made quite a scene, threatening to cancel Atlantic's contract with us if we promote you. Several board members are concerned about the financial implications." Zoe's heart sank, but she kept her voice steady. "I understand. We've adjourned until tomorrow morning for the final vote," Richard continued. 9 a.m. sharp. I'd like you to be there." "To hear the decision?" "To address the board directly," Richard replied. "If you're going to fight for this position, they should hear from you personally." The invitation was unexpected, unprecedented even. Director candidates never address the board directly regarding their appointments. "I'll be there," Zoe promised. As she hung up, another call came through. William Grant. "I just left the board meeting," he said, his voice tight with anger. "Pierce is calling in every favor, pulling every string. He's determined to make an example of you." "Why does he care so much about protecting one flight attendant?" Zoe wondered. "It goes deeper than that," William replied. "If Atlantic Airways acknowledges racial profiling in this case, they're potentially liable for dozens of similar incidents they've swept under the rug. We're talking millions in potential lawsuits." The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just about Heather Winters or even Brandon Pierce's nepotism. It was about an entire system designed to protect corporate interests at the expense of individuals who suffered discrimination. "What are my chances tomorrow?" Zoe asked bluntly. William's sigh was answer enough. "Pierce has 3 solid votes against you. 4 board members are firmly in your corner, including me. The remaining 5 are wavering, concerned about the financial implications of losing Atlantic's business. So I need to convince 3 of them." "Against significant pressure," William confirmed. "It won't be easy." After hanging up, Zoe sat down at the hotel desk and began writing. If she had one opportunity to address the board directly, She needed to make every word count. This wasn't just about a promotion anymore. It was about challenging the assumption that standing against discrimination was somehow incompatible with business success. As midnight approached, Zoe finally set down her pen, the speech complete. Tomorrow would determine not just her professional future, but whether corporations could continue using financial leverage to silence those who experience discrimination. Whatever happened, she was ready to face it head-on. By morning, Zoe's interview had gone viral. Stand with Zoe trended nationally as viewers shared clips of her measured, articulate description of the flight incident and its aftermath. Comments poured in from Black professionals across industries, sharing similar experiences of having to choose between their dignity and their careers. Mainstream news networks picked up the story, featuring panels discussing racial profiling in commercial aviation and corporate America's handling of discrimination claims. Social justice organizations issued statements of support, while Atlantic Airways stock dipped 3 points in pre-market trading. Zoe barely slept, rising at dawn to prepare for the board meeting. She selected her most powerful suit, a crimson Chanel with structured shoulders that Patricia had once described as her battle armor. After applying her makeup with meticulous care, she reviewed her speech one final time before heading to Pinnacle headquarters. The lobby buzzed with unusual activity. Employees whispered as she passed, some offering subtle nods of support, others averting their eyes. The receptionist directed her to a waiting area outside the boardroom, where Patricia already sat. "It's a circus in there," Patricia reported quietly. Pierce arrived with Atlantic's legal counsel. "He's threatening a complete severance of business relationships if they promote you." "Is that legal?" Zoe asked. "Technically, no. Practically, companies find ways to punish those who challenge them." Before Zoe could respond, her phone buzzed with a news alert. Atlantic Airways flight attendant claims victim status in racial profiling accusation. The accompanying article featured Heather Winters on a conservative morning show, teary-eyed as she described receiving death threats after being canceled for doing her job. The host nodded sympathetically, never questioning Heather's version of events or the airline's history of similar incidents. "They're playing hardball," Patricia observed, reading over Zoe's shoulder. "So are we," Zoe replied, opening her email to find dozens of messages from Pinnacle clients expressing concern about the company's association with the controversy. Not all the messages were negative, however. 3 major clients, collectively worth more than Atlantic's business, had written to express support for Zoe's stance, stating that they valued working with companies that demonstrated integrity in addressing discrimination. The boardroom doors opened, and Richard Evans appeared. "They're ready for you." Zoe rose, smoothing her suit jacket. "No matter what happens in there, thank you for giving me this opportunity." Richard's expression was unreadable as he led her into the boardroom. 14 people sat around the massive table, 12 board members, Brandon Pierce, and an unfamiliar woman in a severe black suit who must be Atlantic's attorney. William Grant offered an encouraging nod as Zoe took her position at the head of the table. The tension in the room was palpable, with Pierce glaring openly at her. "Ms. Robinson," began Eleanor Blackwell, the board chairwoman, "we've asked you here to address concerns about your recent public statements regarding Atlantic Airways, a valued Pinnacle client. The floor is yours." Zoe placed her prepared speech on the table but didn't immediately reference it. Instead, she looked directly at Brandon Pierce. "Mr. Pierce, how many racial profiling complaints has Atlantic Airways received in the past 5 years?" Pierce's face reddened. "That's confidential company information." "Is it 73? Because that's the number I found when I researched public records and social media reports." The attorney beside Pierce leaned forward. "Ms. Robinson, making unsubstantiated allegations against Atlantic Airways could constitute defamation." "These aren't allegations," Zoe replied calmly. "They're documented complaints, many with video evidence similar to mine. What's notable is Atlantic's response: private settlements with NDAs, no public accountability, and no meaningful change in practices." She turned back to the board. You're not just deciding whether to promote me today. You're deciding whether Pinnacle Industries values ethical business practices and equal treatment more than comfortable relationships with clients who engage in discriminatory behavior. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. William Grant leaned forward. Ms. Robinson raises a valid point. Atlantic's contract with Pinnacle includes an ethics clause that either party can invoke if the other engages in discriminatory practices. Pierce slammed his hand on the table. This is outrageous. One incident with one employee does not constitute a pattern of discrimination. One incident? Zoe questioned, pulling out her phone. Yesterday, after my interview aired, I received hundreds of messages from Black professionals sharing similar experiences on Atlantic flights. She began reading testimonials. A neurosurgeon questioned about his first-class ticket. An attorney asked to show additional ID. A corporate executive's bags searched while white passengers boarded unimpeded. As she read, the board members' expressions changed. What had been framed as an isolated incident now appeared part of a troubling pattern. Pinnacle Industries has built its reputation on integrity, Zoe continued. That reputation is worth more than any single client contract. The question is whether you're willing to compromise those values when standing firm becomes financially inconvenient. Pierce stood abruptly. This is a setup. You're deliberately trying to damage Atlantic's reputation to advance your own career. Mr. Pierce, Eleanor interrupted, please control yourself or you'll be asked to leave. The Atlantic attorney whispered urgently to Pierce, who reluctantly sat down, still fuming. Zoe finished her prepared remarks, outlining her qualifications for the director position and her vision for Pinnacle's marketing future. When she concluded, Eleanor thanked her and asked her to wait outside while they deliberated. In the hallway, Zoe checked her phone to find the media storm intensifying. Journalists were reporting that multiple Atlantic employees had come forward with internal documents showing the airline had a policy of flagging passengers who appear out of place, a directive that disproportionately impacted travelers of color. A text from William provided updates from inside. Pierce stormed out, "Vote happening now." 45 minutes later, Richard emerged from the boardroom, his expression grave. "The board has reached a decision. They'd like to inform you personally." Re-entering the boardroom, Zoe found the atmosphere transformed. Several board members wouldn't meet her eyes, while others watched her with newfound respect. Eleanor spoke first. "Ms. Robinson, the board appreciates your candor and courage in addressing these difficult issues. After careful consideration, we've decided to..." She paused, glancing at the other members. "Postpone the director announcement until the current media situation has stabilized." The disappointment struck like a physical blow, but Zoe maintained her composure. "I understand. Thank you for your consideration. We hope you'll continue your excellent work at Pinnacle while we monitor developments," Eleanor added, the corporate speak failing to disguise the reality. They were unwilling to stand firmly against discrimination when it carried financial consequences. As Zoe gathered her materials to leave, William Grant spoke up. "I'd like my objection to this decision noted in the official minutes. Ms. Robinson is unquestionably the most qualified candidate, and delaying her promotion based on her experience of discrimination sets a dangerous precedent." 3 other board members voiced similar objections, creating an unusual rift in the typically unified body. Outside Pinnacle headquarters, reporters waited with cameras and microphones. Zoe declined comment, maintaining her professionalism even as the reality sank in. Speaking truth had indeed cost her the promotion she'd earned through 15 years of exceptional work. Back in her hotel room, Zoe called Calvin to share the news. "They're cowards," he declared angrily. "After everything you've done for that company." "They're protecting their business interests," Zoe replied, surprising herself with her calm acceptance. "I knew this might happen when I declined the settlement." "So, what now?" Calvin asked. Before Zoe could answer, her phone buzzed with an incoming email. The subject line read, "Brandon Pierce, the full story." The anonymous email contained internal Atlantic Airways documents revealing that Brandon Pierce wasn't just protecting his niece. He was covering up a company-wide pattern of discriminatory practices that he had personally implemented. Most damning was an email from Pierce to senior staff instructing them to apply additional security measures to passengers who don't fit the premium traveler profile, a thinly veiled directive to target people of color in first class. While Zoe was still processing this information, a call came through from Lisa Chen, Atlantic Airways' CEO. "Ms. Robinson," Chen began formally, "I've just been made aware of some disturbing information regarding the incident on your flight and our company's handling of similar situations. I would appreciate an opportunity to meet with you privately tomorrow morning." The request was unexpected, but Zoe agreed to the meeting. After hanging up, she forwarded the anonymous email to William Grant with a simple message, "Thought the board should see this." That evening, as social media continued to explode with #StandWithZoe posts, Zoe received word that 3 civil rights organizations had announced investigations into Atlantic Airways practices. Several major corporations had issued statements expressing concern about their business relationships with the airline. The tide was turning, but for Zoe personally, the cost had already been paid. The director position she'd worked toward for 15 years had slipped through her fingers because she'd refused to be silent about discrimination. As she prepared for bed, Zoe's phone rang one final time. Richard Evans calling. "I just left an emergency board meeting," he said without preamble. "The documents you sent William have changed everything. The board has reversed its decision and will be announcing your promotion tomorrow morning." Zoe sat down hard on the edge of the bed. "What about Atlantic Airways?" "Pierce has been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. The board has determined that maintaining a relationship with a company engaging in documented discriminatory practices poses a greater risk to Pinnacle's reputation than any potential business loss." After hanging up, Zoe sat in stunned silence. The promotion would be hers after all, not because the board had initially done the right thing, but because the evidence of wrongdoing had become too overwhelming to ignore. The victory felt bittersweet. Yes, she had achieved the position she'd worked toward for 15 years, but the system had only bent toward justice when forced by overwhelming evidence and public pressure. How many others had been silenced because they lacked the platform or proof to make their voices heard? Tomorrow would bring the formal announcement of her promotion, but it would also bring a new set of challenges, using her position to create lasting change in a system still resistant to full equality. The real work was just beginning. The following morning, Zoe arrived at Pinnacle headquarters an hour early. The security guard greeted her with newfound respect, whispering, "Good luck today," as she signed in. Word of her impending promotion had clearly spread throughout the company, despite the board's official silence. Patricia Washington waited by the elevators, elegant in a charcoal suit that had seen decades of corporate battles. "Ready for the circus?" "As I'll ever be," Zoe replied, stepping into the elevator. "Has the board made the announcement yet?" "Not officially. Richard wants to do it in person at this morning's meeting." Patricia lowered her voice. "But there's been a development. Lisa Chen arrived 20 minutes ago with Atlantic's entire executive team. They're in the main conference room with the board right now." Zoe's stomach tightened. "That can't be good." "Or it could be very good," Patricia countered. "Chen isn't Pierce. She built her reputation on corporate accountability." The executive floor buzzed with unusual activity. Assistants hurried between offices with urgent expressions, while the normally quiet hallways filled with hushed conversations that ceased when Zoe approached. Outside the main conference room, Richard's executive assistant intercepted them. "Ms. Robinson, Mr. Evans asked that you wait in his office until you're called." Richard's corner office offered a panoramic view of Chicago's skyline, but Zoe was too tense to appreciate it. She paced the length of the room, checking her phone repeatedly. A text from William provided little reassurance. "Intense discussion happening. Hold tight." Patricia sat calmly, watching Zoe with understanding eyes. "Whatever happens in there, remember that you've already won the more important battle. You stood your ground when it would have been easier to take the money and stay silent. If I lose this promotion after all, was it worth it?" Zoe asked, voicing the doubt that had nagged at her through the night. "You tell me," Patricia replied. "Is your dignity worth more than a title?" Before Zoe could answer, the door opened. Richard Evans entered, his expression unreadable. "They're ready for you," he said simply. The main conference room fell silent as Zoe entered. Around the massive table sat the Pinnacle board members on one side and the Atlantic Airways executive team on the other, corporate adversaries facing off across a polished battlefield. Lisa Chen, a formidable woman in her 60s, sat at the center of the Atlantic group. Brandon Pierce was notably absent. Eleanor Blackwell spoke first. "Ms. Robinson, thank you for joining us. As you can see, we have representatives from Atlantic Airways present. Before we proceed with any announcements regarding the director position, they've requested an opportunity to address recent events." Lisa Chen rose, command radiating from her petite frame. "Ms. Robinson, I want to begin by offering you my personal apology for the treatment you experienced on our flight. It was unacceptable, inexcusable, and contrary to the values Atlantic Airways claims to uphold." The directness of the apology surprised everyone in the room. "Following your public statement and the subsequent media attention, I ordered a comprehensive review of our passenger complaint records and internal policies," Chen continued. "What we uncovered was disturbing. A pattern of discriminatory treatment that had been systematically buried by certain members of our executive team. Several Atlantic executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Brandon Pierce has been terminated, effective immediately," Chen announced, as has Heather Winters. "Our investigation revealed that Mr. Pierce had implemented unofficial profiling practices and used his position to shield employees, including his niece, from consequences when complaints arose." Murmurs spread around the table as Chen placed a folder on the table. "We've prepared a full report of our findings and the corrective actions we're taking, which include mandatory anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff and a complete overhaul of our complaint review process." Chen turned to face Zoe directly. "Ms. Robinson, we're also establishing a passenger advisory board to provide ongoing guidance on inclusivity initiatives, and we would be honored if you would consider serving as its inaugural chairperson." The offer caught Zoe off guard. This wasn't the perfunctory corporate apology she'd expected, but a substantive acknowledgement of systemic issues and a commitment to meaningful change. "That's a generous offer," Zoe replied carefully. "I'd like to review the details of Atlantic's proposed changes before making any decisions." Chen nodded respectfully. "Of course. We understand that rebuilding trust will take more than promises." As Chen returned to her seat, Eleanor Blackwell cleared her throat. "In light of these developments, the board would like to proceed with our planned announcement." She nodded to Richard, yielding the floor. Richard stood, adjusting his tie, a nervous habit Zoe had noticed during particularly significant company moments. "As you all know, Pinnacle Industries has been searching for a new director of global marketing. After an exhaustive selection process and careful consideration of all qualified candidates, the board has unanimously decided to offer the position to Zoe Robinson." The expected announcement still sent a wave of emotion through Zoe. 15 years of work, of proving herself, of overcoming barriers visible and invisible, had culminated in this moment. "Furthermore," Richard continued, "in recognition of recent events and the important conversations they've sparked, the board has decided to create a new executive position, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, reporting directly to me. We believe Ms. Robinson's unique insights and demonstrated leadership make her an ideal candidate for this role, in addition to her marketing responsibilities." The room fell silent. This wasn't just a promotion, but an elevation to the executive leadership team, a position with genuine authority to drive organizational change. Before Zoe could respond, one board member, Harold Jenkins, known for his conservative views, raised his hand. "I feel compelled to voice my concerns. While Ms. Robinson is undeniably qualified for the marketing position, adding diversity responsibilities seems reactive rather than strategic. Are we making this decision based on qualifications or public relations?" The question hung in the air, its implication clear. Was this promotion being offered on merit or as damage control? Zoe felt a familiar burn of indignation rising. Even in this moment of achievement, Her capabilities were being questioned in ways her white counterparts never experienced. "If I may," she began, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "My marketing strategies have consistently outperformed industry benchmarks by an average of 27%. I've brought in 12 major clients representing over $80 million in annual revenue. My campaign for the Taylor account won 3 industry awards last year." She paused, meeting Jenkins's gaze directly. "As for diversity initiatives, I've led Pinnacle's mentorship program for 3 years, increasing retention of employees of color by 40%. I've developed inclusive marketing strategies that expanded our client base among multicultural consumers. And yes, I've personally navigated the challenges of being the only one in the room throughout my career, giving me insights that can't be learned from a textbook." William Grant nodded approvingly. "I believe Ms. Robinson has more than answered the question of qualifications." Jenkins flushed but said nothing further. Richard resumed. "The board's decision is final. We'd like to introduce Ms. Robinson in her new capacity at tomorrow morning's company-wide meeting, followed by a press conference announcing both her appointment and our new partnership with Atlantic Airways on diversity initiatives." As the meeting concluded, board members and Atlantic executives approached to offer congratulations. Lisa Chen handed Zoe her business card with a private cell number written on the back. "When you're ready to discuss the advisory board, call me directly," she said. "What happened to you was inexcusable, but your response to it has created an opportunity for real change at Atlantic. We need voices like yours." William Grant was the last to approach, waiting until the room had nearly emptied. "Congratulations, Director Robinson. A well-deserved promotion, though I suspect the road ahead won't be easy." "It never has been," Zoe replied with a small smile. "The old guard won't yield power without a fight," William warned, glancing toward the door Jenkins had exited through. "They'll be watching for any misstep, any reason to claim you're not up to the task." "Let them watch," Zoe said. "I've spent 15 years proving myself. I'm not about to stop now." As she left the conference room, Zoe found Patricia waiting in the hallway. The older woman's eyes shone with unshed tears as she embraced her protege. "Director Robinson," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "and the youngest executive team member in Pinnacle history." "I couldn't have done it without you," Zoe replied, squeezing Patricia's hands. "You did this yourself," Patricia countered firmly, "by refusing to be silent when silence would have been easier. That's the legacy you'll leave for the young women coming after you." Back in her office, Zoe called Calvin with the news. His whoops of joy brought a smile to her face. The first genuine one since the flight incident had upended her life. "We're celebrating tonight," he declared. "Dinner at that rooftop place you love." "I'd like that," Zoe agreed, realizing she hadn't properly eaten in days. Next, she called her parents, putting them on speakerphone to share the news simultaneously. Her father's deep voice cracked with emotion as he expressed his pride, while her mother whispered prayers of thanks. "We always knew you were destined for greatness," her father said. "But your mother and I are most proud of how you achieved it, with dignity and integrity intact." As evening approached, Zoe packed up her belongings, marveling at how dramatically her circumstances had changed in just 72 hours. From the humiliation of racial profiling to the pinnacle of her career journey, with an unexpected platform to drive meaningful change. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Some would resist her initiatives. Others would claim she'd been promoted only because of the controversy. The path of a pioneer was never easy. But as Zoe Robinson left Pinnacle headquarters that evening, she walked taller than she had in years. Not just because she'd achieved the position she'd worked toward for so long, but because she'd done so without compromising the principles that defined her. The real victory wasn't the title. It was discovering that her voice, when used with courage and conviction, had the power to change systems that had seemed immovable. The morning of the official announcement dawned bright and clear in Chicago. Zoe awoke early, feeling a curious blend of nervousness and serenity. Today would mark not just her professional coronation, but a public commitment to using her position to drive systemic change. She selected her outfit with particular care, A striking cobalt blue suit that Patricia had once told her commanded attention without asking permission for it. As she applied her makeup, Zoe studied her reflection, noting the subtle changes in her expression. The woman looking back at her carried herself differently now, not just with confidence, but with the quiet power of someone who had faced down injustice and emerged victorious. When she arrived at Pinnacle headquarters, the lobby buzzed with unusual energy. Employees gathered in small clusters, conversations pausing as she passed. Some offered congratulatory smiles, while others watched with curious eyes, wondering how this new director, elevated amid unprecedented circumstances, would shape the company's future. Richard Evans met her outside the main auditorium where the company-wide meeting would be held. "Ready for your moment, Director Robinson?" "Ready," Zoe confirmed, finding that it was true. The anxiety that had followed her throughout her career, the constant pressure to be flawless, to justify her presence, had diminished. She had earned this position twice over. First, through 15 years of exceptional work, and then by refusing to be silent about discrimination, even when speaking out carried professional risk. Inside the auditorium, hundreds of Pinnacle employees waited. On stage, board members had already taken their seats, with 2 empty chairs reserved for Richard and Zoe. In the front row, Patricia beamed with pride, while William Grant offered an encouraging nod. As Richard led Zoe toward the stage, she noticed an unexpected figure slipping through the side door. Heather Winters, the flight attendant whose actions had set these events in motion. Their eyes met across the room, Heather's widening in recognition and alarm. She clearly hadn't expected to encounter Zoe here, in a position of power rather than humiliation. Richard began the announcement with his typical corporate eloquence, detailing Zoe's accomplishments and qualifications for the director position. As he spoke, a server circulated among the board members with champagne flutes for the celebratory toast that would follow. "And so, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Pinnacle Industries' new Director of Global Marketing and Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, Zoe Robinson." Applause filled the auditorium as Zoe rose to accept the ceremonial glass of champagne. In her excitement, she gripped the delicate flute too tightly, and it shattered in her hand. Blood dripped from her palm onto the pristine white tablecloth as camera flashes captured the moment. "Congratulations on your promotion," Richard announced over the gasps. Unaware that Heather Winters, the flight attendant who had humiliated Zoe just days before, now stood frozen at the doorway, her face a mask of shock. A staff member rushed forward with a napkin for Zoe's bleeding hand while the company doctor was summoned. Despite the momentary chaos, Zoe maintained her composure, wrapping the napkin around her palm before stepping to the microphone. "Thank you all for this warm welcome," she began, her voice steady and clear. "A little cut won't stop me. I've overcome far greater obstacles to stand before you today." A ripple of laughter spread through the audience, breaking the tension. Zoe continued her speech, outlining her vision for Pinnacle's marketing future while the doctor discreetly bandaged her hand off stage. Throughout it all, her eyes occasionally found Heather's, the flight attendant who remained rooted near the exit, seemingly unable to process this dramatic reversal of fortunes. When the formal proceedings concluded, Lisa Chen approached the stage. The Atlantic Airways CEO had come to announce their new partnership with Pinnacle on diversity initiatives, a direct result of the confrontation that had begun on that fateful flight. "As part of our commitment to meaningful change," Chen announced, "Atlantic Airways is implementing a comprehensive anti-bias training program for all employees. We're calling it the Robinson Initiative, with Director Robinson's permission, to ensure we never forget the importance of confronting discrimination directly." The crowd's applause was thunderous. As Chen and Zoe shook hands for the press cameras, Zoe caught sight of Heather slipping out the door. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. The woman who had tried to remove her from first class was now removing herself from a space where Zoe held undeniable authority. 6 months later, Zoe stood before a different audience, 20 young professionals of color selected for Pinnacle's new executive mentorship program. From her corner office on the 35th floor, Chicago's skyline provided a dramatic backdrop as she shared her journey with candid honesty. The path to this office wasn't easy or straightforward, she told them. There were countless moments when staying silent would have been easier than speaking up, when accepting the status quo seemed like the only way to advance. Among the mentees sat Keisha Robinson, now in her second year of medical school and beaming with pride as her older sister embodied the principles their parents had instilled in them. But true leadership isn't about reaching a position of power, Zoe continued. It's about what you do with that power once you have it. It's about creating space for those coming after you, so their journey might be a little less difficult than yours was. The Robinson Initiative had expanded beyond Atlantic Airways to become an industry standard, with multiple corporations adopting its framework. The Passenger Advisory Board Zoe chaired had implemented policy changes that measurably reduced incidents of profiling across the airline industry. Not all the changes had been without resistance. Harold Jenkins and 2 other board members had resigned in protest of what they called excessive focus on social issues at the expense of business priorities. But the company's performance under Zoe's marketing leadership, with 3 major campaign successes and a 14% revenue increase in just 6 months, had silenced most critics. Meanwhile, Heather Winters had found herself in dramatically changed circumstances. After her termination from Atlantic Airways, her uncle's connections no longer shielded her from the consequences of her actions. Her widely publicized involvement in the incident had made her toxic to premium airlines, forcing her to accept an entry-level position with a budget carrier. In a twist of cosmic irony, her new supervisor was Raymond Johnson, the same black security guard who had offered Zoe a moment of understanding at LaGuardia. Raymond, who had since been promoted to customer service manager, ran a tight but fair operation, requiring Heather to complete the same anti-bias training program her actions had helped create. On a bright Tuesday morning, Zoe boarded another first-class flight to New York, this time for a speaking engagement at a national marketing conference. The difference in experience was striking. The check-in attendant greeted her warmly. Security processed her efficiently, and the flight crew welcomed her aboard with genuine respect. As she settled into her seat, the lead flight attendant approached. "Director Robinson, it's an honor to have you flying with us today. I completed the Robinson Initiative training last month, and it transformed my perspective on customer service." Zoe smiled, accepting the pre-flight champagne with her scarred right hand, a permanent reminder of that boardroom moment when everything had changed. "I'm glad to hear that. What was your main takeaway from the program?" "That excellent service means treating everyone with equal dignity, not making assumptions based on how people look," the attendant replied without hesitation. "And that speaking up against bias isn't just right, it's necessary for real change." As the plane took off, Zoe gazed out the window at the receding Chicago skyline. Her journey had come full circle, from being profiled as suspicious in first class to helping transform the very industry that had humiliated her. The greatest victory wasn't the corner office, the executive title, or even the program bearing her name. It was knowing that because she had refused to accept discrimination, even when standing firm carried significant personal risk, the path would be a little smoother for the next black woman who settled into a first-class seat she had rightfully earned. Real change rarely came from comfortable compromise or convenient silence. It came from those willing to stand firm at critical moments, to speak truth despite the potential cost. In that airport, on that plane, Zoe Robinson had made such a choice, and in doing so, created ripples that would continue long after her name faded from corporate memory. The true measure of her success wouldn't be found in quarterly reports or industry awards, but in all the confrontations that would never happen because she had stood her ground when it mattered most. This story reveals a powerful truth about confronting discrimination. Speaking up might be costly, but silence guarantees that injustice continues unchallenged. Zoe Robinson faced an impossible choice between her hard-earned career advancement and her dignity. By choosing to stand firm against racial profiling, she not only reclaimed her own power, but created systemic change that benefited countless others. The corporate world often presents these false choices, suggesting that success requires accepting discrimination as an unavoidable cost of advancement. Zoe's journey demonstrates that excellence and integrity aren't opposing values. Her professional qualifications remained unchanged throughout her ordeal. What changed was the system's recognition that talent shouldn't be silenced by discrimination. Most importantly, Zoe's story shows that meaningful change rarely comes from comfortable compromise. It comes from those brave enough to risk their personal comfort for a greater purpose. While not everyone faces such dramatic moments of decision, we all encounter situations where we must choose between easy silence and difficult truth. The impact of these choices extends far beyond our individual circumstances, creating ripples of change that transform environments for those who follow. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and had to decide whether to speak up or stay silent? Comment below with your experiences. Was Zoe right to risk her promotion by refusing the settlement? Or would you have handled the situation differently? Like this video if you believe one person's courage really can create systemic change, and subscribe for more stories about those brave enough to challenge injustice even when it's costly. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that standing up for what's right is always worth it, even when the path is difficult. Thank you for watching. And remember, your voice matters more than you know.